Freedom Munitions X-Def ammunition in 9mm and 357 Magnum, and we're going to test it today in the short barrels. So I tested this stuff in our a little bit longer barrels, a 5-inch semi-auto to test the 9mm, and a 4-inch revolver to test the 357 Magnum, and we had over expansion issues with both of those. So the first thought was, you know, they might work a little bit better with a little bit less velocity in our short barrels. So our 9mm is a 124 grain jacketed hollow point. It's supposed to be a bonded jacketed hollow point. We are rated at 1125 feet per second. Our 357 Magnum is rated at 1575 feet per second, is a 125 grain jacketed hollow point. And I was surprised because we got 1506 feet per second in our 4-inch barrel, and we didn't have a lot of recoil. So my first thought was, you know, not only would this be a pretty good short barrel load because we would lower that expansion a little bit, but also the recoil wasn't all that sharp. So we're going to see how these do in our little bit shorter barrel. So we're going to go through the chronograph, see what kind of velocity and accuracy we get at the same time. Then I'm going to do my 10% clear ballistic test. We're going to go into plain clear ballistics to see what the best potential of those cartridges are. No denim in the way to clog a hollow point or anything like that. We'll see how they're supposed to perform, what kind of expansion they're supposed to get. And then we'll do more of our real world simulation where I have 4 layers of denim on this first 3-inch piece that represents the pectoral muscle. After that, a 1/4-inch medium density fiberboard right here to represent ribs or sternum. That'll be more of our real world simulation. And then I'm going to shoot at the steel target to see what kind of practical accuracy I can get with these. So let's get started with this test. All right, first up we have our 9mm 124 grain jacketed hollow point. I'm using my 3.2-inch Taurus G2C to test this, and by the way, that's my 2-inch Taurus 605 for the 357 Magnum. So in the 5-inch M&P, we got 1156 feet per second on average, but we're shrinking this barrel down by almost 2 inches. So let's see how close we get to that 1156 feet per second out of my 3.2-inch barrel here. $1,097, 1,100, 1,093, 1,089, 1,087. So very consistent velocity actually, and not really that far below the 1125 feet per second rated velocity. So that's pretty good. Our 357 Magnum, we got 1506 feet per second on the 4-inch barrel. I had someone comment and say they think I'll get 1400 feet per second out of this 2-inch barrel. I highly doubt that, but let's see what I get here. I'll read. Back it up a little here. See, this is the issue here with this chronograph. Sometimes you get a little bit too much flash. And sometimes, I mean, this has a massive amount of flash, so I'm actually going to have to back it up pretty far to try to eliminate that flash, and we'll see if I get some reads. All right, so I am about 8 yards from the target. I hate being this far back, you know, because you got to be a little bit more precise, not hit your chronograph. And I can't see that LED readout screen, so I'm going to try to do what I can do here. $11.11. $779. Obviously that's got to be some sort of an error read. I'll keep going. $756. 1,076, 1145, 1182, 351. So obviously that's an error read. So I don't know. Sometimes I really couldn't tell you why that's reading like that, other than maybe it's picking up on some unburnt powder that's going over the chronograph sensors. Obviously the 700s and the 300 one isn't right, but I believe everything that was in the upper 1000s to 1100 feet per second average was correct. So I'm going to use that as my average because that seems about right. And again, this did not feel like a 357 Magnum. It felt like a 38 plus P with a ton of muzzle flash. But our velocity, you know, typically if you had a full power 125 grain, you're gonna get somewhere around 1250 feet per second, 1200, 1240, 1250, in that range, not about 1100. So yeah, we're really burning up most of this powder after it leaves the muzzle. So yeah, we're losing a lot there. So let's hit our ballistics gel block, see how these compare. All right, our best potential shot, just plain clear ballistics. I started doing this because a lot of times I would test ammo and I would never get hollow point expansion because the hollow points would clog with denim. So I decided to go into doing one shot that's plain clear ballistics, so we can at least see what the hollow point is supposed to look like when it expands, because generally they will expand in plain clear ballistics. And then after that, we'll do more of our real world simulation with our denim and rib simulation. So 9mm, we had some over expansion in the 5-inch barrel. Let's see if we bring this down to just the right threshold so we get better penetration. All right, 357 Magnum. Let's see how this does. Let's go take a look. All right, so we still had a problem with overexpansion in that 9mm. Now this is our plain clear ballistic shot, and it should do a little bit better if we clog the hollow point a little bit with denim to lower that expansion threshold a little bit. But what we got going on here, I know camera parallax will make it look like that bullet is further up from where I'm putting my finger, but we are at about 10 3/4 inches of penetration. So definitely under penetration. Now our 357 Magnum, you know, we changed the velocity significantly. With our 9mm from our 5-inch to our 3.2, we only lost maybe 50 feet per second, maybe a little more, but somewhere around that vicinity. With our 357, we lost like 400 feet per second going from a 4-inch to a 2-inch, which did lower that fragmentation issue. So what we got going on now is a penetration of about 14.5 inches of penetration. So I can't see that bullet through some of that bubbling of that gel, but it does look like we expanded pretty good without fragmentation. So let's put on our denim, put on in our MDF, see how they compare in more of our real world simulation. All right, 4 layers of denim, 3 inches of clear ballistics, a 1/4 inch MDF, our real world simulation. Let's see how our 9mm does. Let me set that back up and we'll hit it with the 357 Magnum. All right, more of our real world simulation, 357 Mag. Let's see what this does. Let's take a look. Yeah, I'm pretty surprised at these results. I was not expecting to see exactly what we're seeing. I thought I was going to see the complete opposite of what we're seeing. So our impact with our 9mm here, we can see that after going through that denim and everything, we still had good bullet expansion. And with our 357, that completely clogged with denim and we had no expansion. So that didn't do that well at all. So looking at our 9mm, we have a little more penetration, a little bit less expansion, but not by much of a margin here. We're only at about 11.5 inches of penetration. So yeah, we have penetration fails with, you know, both of those. The 357 Mag, we got tumbling because the bullet is backwards. So what we see here now is, you know, we didn't get over penetration, but we got about 17.5 inches of penetration, no expansion. And I'm kind of wondering now, I wonder if there's bullet creep on these things. It just makes me kind of wonder if we're having bullet creep with that 357 Mag. Maybe that's why some of the velocities started slowing down. I doubt it, but that's something I should check. So let me do that, and then we'll pull these out of the block, take a close-up look at them, and then I will shoot the steel, see what kind of practical accuracy I can get with these. All right, I'm a little bit concerned because when I looked at the bullets from the 4-inch test, I did notice that there really wasn't much of a cannelure on that bullet. So I'm curious if this is creeping out. So I put some black marker around the case mouth and I started that bullet for our last shot here. So I'm going to see if there's any type of creep out. I'm just going to hold it really light. Couple of shots there. There's a tiny amount of creep. Alright. Well, there is some, and I definitely would not use this in like an air weight revolver, because that could potentially creep out. But in this, 21 ounce, 22 ounce revolver, whatever it is, I don't think that was creeping out enough to cause, significant velocity loss, but it was something I wanted to check. So let's move on. All right, so here's a close-up look at these bullets going through our plain gel. Here is our 9mm. Really good expansion overall. A little bit smaller, I believe, than the 5-inch barrel had it expanding to in plain gel. Our 357 Magnum. No fragmentation like in the 4-inch barrel. Really good expansion. Looks pretty good. Now going through our medium density fiberboard. Here is our 9mm. And we pretty much stayed very similar. A little more damage to that bullet lead. Generally this will get to a much smaller diameter, and it kind of did a little bit, but it still, it didn't shrink down enough to penetrate more. So we still have a little bit of issue with lack of penetration. 357 Magnum, it started to, trumpet out a little bit, but it just couldn't get any expansion. Which, 357 Magnum, along with the word non-expansion or term non-expansion, those two things do not belong together. So seeing this, I don't care what kind of 357 it is, if it doesn't expand in a snub nose, there's something wrong. So even though this did pretty well in a 4-inch barrel, I just don't trust this stuff. So looking at this, okay performance, not great, okay, and pretty bad. So that's a close-up look at those. All right, 12 yards from the target. I'm actually going to stay here. I'm not going to move back from here because I'm not really impressed with this ammo. So I'm going to see what kind of practical shootability I can get on target here. 9mm. Alright, so it shoots pretty good out of a short barrel. I don't really notice any strange recoil spikes or anything like that. 357 mag. A little bit harder to control that ammo. Not a ton of recoil compared to most of the 257 mag, but there's a lot compared to this 9mm. Missed the headshot there. So, all this stuff is pretty shootable. Not a ton of recoil for what it is in a short barrel, but really unimpressed with its terminal ballistics. Now, I would say our 9mm isn't that bad. It's not that bad because we did get really big expansion even through denim and MDF. Now, we did get under penetration, and that can be an issue. I always kind of look at it as lack of expansion is more of an issue than lack of penetration when it comes to self-defense. And the reason why I say that is because historically, if you look at a lot of the old school, stopping power numbers and stuff like that, even ones that did really well, they're like 95, 96% one-shot stop. After the fact, after they collected that data and then they gel test it, what they're seeing a lot of times in the gel is something like 11, 12, 13 inches, even a little bit less than that sometimes. And yet those still have really good stopping power. And you look at some of the stuff where you're not getting expansion with some of those rounds and some of those charts, and the stopping power is really quite low. And if you're not getting expansion, you're definitely getting good penetration. So what that comes down to is, if a hollow point expansion really big, it's going to do a better job at stopping a threat. And most shootings are, you're placing these shots on your attacker front on. And the only time you really need more than, let's say, 10 inches in gel, which would equate to maybe 6 inches in a human, is if you had to make a shot going through the side, through an arm, through all that, and you have to get into the thoracic cavity, and that person will not stop, you know, because of adrenaline and all that. You're going to have an issue with something that overexpands and underpenetrates. But if you make front-on shots with stuff that doesn't expand, that's where you get in those situations where a drug-fueled attacker is taking 12, 13, 15 rounds and not stopping. So there's always a trade-off there, but for me, getting almost adequate penetration while getting really good expansion is a little bit better than, let's say, getting 2 inches more penetration and getting ideal penetration but no expansion. So looking at all this, the shootability, all of that, this isn't the worst 9mm I've ever seen, because, you know, a lot of 9mm from a short barrel, we get no expansion at all. So I like to see this, you know, even with that little bit of lack of penetration. So I would say overall our 9mm in a short barrel isn't bad. It performed almost the same as what it did in the 5-inch barrel. Now our 357 Magnum, while that made a fantastic 4-inch barrel or longer load, and it fragmented, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing, I was thinking we would get perfect, you know, performance in our snub nose, and actually we got just absolutely terrible performance, because whatever powder they're using, it's such that it needs more barrel to burn it up. So it is just, you know, we saw massive fireballs, so we're losing well more than half of its potential energy. And I'm talking going from a carbine down to, you know, a snub nose revolver. So you're still dealing with all that recoil of a cartridge that's over 1,000 foot-pounds energy cartridge out of a carbine, but you're getting the energy of a 9mm. So yeah, a load like this in a snub, it really is kind of a bad idea. So I would say 9mm okay here. This 357, no. So that's what you get today. So as always, comment, share, and like, and thanks for watching.